The morning Nora arrived at Ashvale. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the grass had not been cut in what looked like 2 seasons. She stepped down from the carriage without waiting for the driver to assist her. The gravel shifted under her boots. She stood still for a moment, looking at the house. 3 stories of limestone gone gray with damp, 1 shutter hanging loose on the east wing, a climbing rose that had gone entirely to briar across the front facade. No one came out to greet her. She picked up her own bag. That was how it began. Her name was Nora Calloway. Nora Whitfield now, as of 4 hours ago. The ceremony had been brief and quiet, held in the drawing room of her father's house in Concord, because the church felt too public for a thing so privately transactional. Mr. Whitfield, Garrett, had stood beside her at the mantelpiece, with his hands clasped behind his back, and answered the minister in a voice that carried no warmth and no hostility. Simply a man completing an obligation. When it was done, he had shaken her father's hand, kissed her once on the cheek with dry lips, and told her the carriage would leave at noon. He had not ridden with her. She had not asked why. Nora was 24 years old. She had kept her father's accounts since she was 16, after her mother died and her father's eyesight began to fail him. She knew how to read a ledger the way some women read a letter. Quickly, looking for what was out of place. She knew the difference between what a number said and what it meant. She had grown up understanding that most problems, if you looked at them long enough, resolved into arithmetic. She had not yet decided whether a marriage could be approached the same way. The door to Ashvale opened before she reached it. A woman in a dark dress stepped out, mid-50s, sturdy, with a face that had arranged itself over the years into an expression of permanent. "Mrs. Whitfield," the woman said, not warmly. "Correctly. You must be Mrs. Alderton," Nora said. "I am." A pause. "Mr. Whitfield sends his apologies. He's been called to Boston on a matter of business. He expects to be away for some weeks." Nora looked at her. "Does he?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman stepped aside to let her in. The entry hall smelled of stone and old wood, and something faintly medicinal, as though someone had burned camphor recently to cover a worse smell beneath. A chandelier hung overhead, half its candles unlit. The rugs needed beating. Through the doorway to the left, Nora could see a sitting room with dust covers still on the furniture, as though no one had thought to remove them after the last occasion. She set her bag down at the foot of the stairs. "I'd like to see the household accounts," she said. "All of them, today if possible." Mrs. Alderton's expression shifted, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. "I'll have them brought to the study," she said. "Thank you." Nora picked up her bag again. "Which room is mine?" The room was adequate. The bed had been made with clean linens. There was a small writing desk by the window that looked out over the back of the property. A kitchen garden gone completely to weeds, and beyond it a field that may have once held cattle. She stood at the window for a long time. She was not crying. She had made a decision, before the carriage left Concord, that she would not spend the first day crying. It seemed like a waste of an afternoon. The accounts arrived after supper. She spread them across the study desk and lit every lamp in the room and began. The household accounts told a story, as accounts always did if you were patient enough to listen. Ashvale had been well managed. Once, the records from 8 years ago showed a productive dairy operation, a working kitchen garden, a full household staff of 11, regular payments to local tradespeople, a butcher, a blacksmith, a glazier for the greenhouses. The income from the Whitfield properties had been steady, if not spectacular. Then came a gap of 2 years with almost no entries. Then the handwriting changed. Then a company called Harmond and Pierce began appearing in the ledgers. Quarterly payments, labeled simply management fees, increasing each year without explanation. The current year's fees were nearly 4 times what they had been 6 years ago. There was no corresponding increase in services rendered that Nora could identify anywhere in the property itself. She looked around the study. The single lamp burning in the corner. The empty stables she'd seen from the upstairs window. The kitchen garden that hadn't been planted in what looked like at least 2 seasons. She wrote the name Harmond and Pierce at the top of a clean sheet of paper and underlined it twice. It took her a week to reconstruct what had happened. She went through every ledger she could find, including 2 she discovered wrapped in oilcloth in a chest in the cellar that Mrs. Alderton had not mentioned. She cross-referenced the management payments against the property tax records, which the county office in Briarfield was eventually willing to share with her after she made the trip in person, and explained, quietly and firmly, that she was the property owner's wife and had full authority to review them. The clerk had looked uncertain. "I assure you," Nora had said, "this is not a matter of dispute." He had produced the records. The gap she found was significant. Harmond and Pierce had been collecting management fees on 3 of the Whitfield properties simultaneously. Ashvale, a farmstead in Dunmore, and a mill property north of Briarfield. The mill had not been operating for 4 years. The farmstead had been leased to tenants whose rent was going, based on the numbers Nora could reconstruct. Somewhere between Harmond and Pierce and a second entity she couldn't yet identify. Not to the Whitfield estate. She went home and wrote it all down. Then she wrote a letter to the county land office, requesting the original contract between Garrett Whitfield and Harmond and Pierce, if one existed on file. She reflected, beginning to understand why the house had been left to go to ruin. It was not neglect, exactly. It was extraction. The second week she turned her attention to the garden. It was not that she had solved the financial problem. She had not yet, not fully. But she had been staring at ledgers for 6 days, and her eyes needed something else to look at. The kitchen garden was small enough to be manageable. She found tools in the outbuilding, older but functional. She found seed packets in a tin on a shelf in the pantry, dated 3 years prior, and tested them for viability in a damp cloth over several days. Most of them were still good. There was a young man, a boy, really, not more than 19, who appeared at the garden gate on her 3rd morning of clearing. He stood watching her for a moment before she... "You looking for work?" she said. His name was Clem. He had been helping at Ashvale intermittently for 2 years, doing whatever odd jobs Mrs. Alderton asked of him, but had not been paid in 4 months because, as he put it, there was no money coming through for it. "Come back tomorrow morning," Nora told him. "I'll have something more regular." She paid him from her own money, the modest savings she had managed over years of keeping her father's books and accepting a small salary for it. Money she had kept in a separate account that her father had not known about, which she had thought of, privately, as her independence fund. It was not a large sum, but it was hers, and it was enough for now. Clem turned out to be a capable worker who knew more about kitchen gardens than she'd expected. By the end of the second week they had cleared 3 of the 4 beds, and turned the soil and begun planting. She worked alongside him most mornings. Mrs. Alderton watched from the kitchen window with an expression Nora couldn't entirely read. On Friday of that week a letter arrived from Harmond and Pierce. It was addressed to the Whitfield household, and written in a tone that managed to be simultaneously formal and subtly threatening. They had received her inquiry to the county office regarding the property management contract, they wrote. They wished to clarify that all arrangements were made with the full knowledge and agreement of Mr. Whitfield, and that any further inquiries regarding the management of the properties should be directed to Mr. Whitfield himself through their office. Nora read it twice. Then she wrote back, by return post, to inform them that she had reviewed the household accounts in full and had several specific questions regarding the fee structure of their arrangement, which she would appreciate answered in writing within 14 days. She listed the questions. There were 11 of them. She did not expect satisfying answers, but she wanted the questions on record. Garrett came back after 3 weeks. She heard the carriage before she saw it. She was in the garden with Clem, staking the early peas, and she straightened up and watched the vehicle come down the lane. She had dirt on her gloves and her hair had come loose on one side. She did not fix it. He stepped out looking tired. His coat was well made and his posture was correct, but his face, in the afternoon light, had a weariness to it that she thought was not entirely about the journey. He was 36. He had been married before. His first wife, Emmeline, had died of a fever 5 years ago. That much she knew. No one had told her much else, except that the grief had changed him and that he had been before it a different kind of man. He stopped when he saw her in the garden. She met his eyes across the distance without looking away. He came to the gate. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, as Mrs. Alderton had said it correctly without warmth. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. "How was Boston?" A pause, productive. She pulled off one glove and held out her hand. He shook it, which she could see surprised him slightly. It was not a customary gesture. But she had found in the past that shaking hands rather than curtsying set the tone for a conversation in a useful direction. "I've been going through the household accounts," she said. "When you have time, I'd like to discuss them with you." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been going through the accounts?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since the first day." He didn't respond, but something moved through his expression. Not displeasure, exactly. She would have expected displeasure, had prepared herself for it. This was something else. Something closer to surprise that had not yet decided what to become. "This evening, then," he said. After supper, he went inside. She put her glove back on and returned to the peas. The conversation after supper lasted 2 hours. She had prepared carefully. The ledgers in order. The timeline she had reconstructed laid out on paper. The Harmond and Pierce correspondence in a folder. She had not prepared a speech. She presented the information the way she would have presented it to her father, clearly, in sequence, without inflection that might be mistaken for accusation. She told him what the management fees had been 6 years ago, and what they were now. She showed him the farmstead rental income that was not appearing in the estate accounts. She laid out, as clearly as she could reconstruct it, where the money had been going. Garrett sat across from her at the study desk and listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the papers for a long moment. She had learned, in those weeks, that the silence in this house was a different quality of silence than she had grown up with. Her father's silences had been the silences of a tired man. The silences of Ashvale were older. "How long have they been taking the rental income?" he said. "Based on the records I've been able to access, I believe approximately 3 years. Though I've only been able to confirm 2 with documents, and the mill. I would need to visit the property to be certain. But the records suggest it has not been operated or leased since before Harmond and Pierce took over management. There may be equipment still there." He was quiet again. Then, "Did you go to the county office yourself?" "I did. They gave you the records." "They were initially reluctant. I explained the situation." He looked up at her then. She could not entirely identify the expression on his face, but it had changed from what it was when she came into the room. Something had shifted. "I've been paying their fees from accounts in Boston," he said. "I didn't. I stopped looking at the specifics. After Emmeline died, I let the management go because I didn't." He stopped, started again. "I trusted them to handle things and I didn't look at it closely." "You were grieving," Nora said. He seemed caught off guard by the directness of it. "Yes." She nodded. She did not say anything further on that subject. It was not her place to press at a wound she hadn't earned the right to touch. But she wanted him to understand that she knew, and that she was not making a case against him. Only a case against the situation. "I think the next step would be to request a full audit," she said. "I can draft the letter if you would like. I'd also recommend speaking with a solicitor before we approach Harmond and Pierce directly. Their response to my initial inquiry was, 'Managing.' You wrote to them." "I wrote asking for clarification of the fee structure. 11 specific questions. Have they answered?" "Not yet." He looked at her across the desk. "You've been doing this for 3 weeks." "Yes, alone. I had Clem for the garden." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close to the territory a smile would occupy. "I'll contact the solicitor tomorrow," he said. "Good." She began gathering the papers. "There's one more thing. The kitchen garden will produce by August if the weather holds. I'd like to discuss hiring 2 additional people for the house. The minimum to run things properly. What Mrs. Alderton has been managing alone is unreasonable." He was watching her with the expression she had no name for yet. "All right," he said. She closed the folder. She looked at him directly. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I want to tell you something. I did not come here expecting a love match. I came because my father's situation required it, and because the arrangement seemed workable. I intend to make it work. I am not asking for more than a household to manage and the authority to manage it, but I cannot manage it if I'm being kept outside of its finances. Do you understand me?" The fire shifted in the grate. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I understand you." "Good," she said. "Good night, Miss Whitfield." She left the study and went upstairs, and when she closed the door of her room she stood against it for a moment, in the dark. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. She breathed steadily until it slowed. Then she lit the lamp and sat at the little writing desk by the window, and opened her notebook and wrote, in her careful even hand, everything she still needed to do. The solicitor was a man named Mr. Tarrant, who came from Briarfield the following week and sat at the study desk that Nora had been using as a command post, and read through the documents she had assembled, with the expression of a man doing arithmetic in his head. "This is well organized," he said, when he was finished. "Thank you," Nora said. Garrett was seated to her left, which she noticed he had positioned himself to do. He had been present for every conversation with the solicitor, with the county office clerk who came for a secondary consultation, with the Harmond and Pierce representative, who arrived 2 weeks later, looking polished and slightly less certain than his letters had suggested he was. He did not direct the conversations. He let her direct them. But he was present, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that this mattered to her. The representative from Harmond and Pierce was a man named Mr. Fitch. He was well dressed and spoke with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed. He acknowledged certain irregularities, his word, in the management of the farmstead rental income. He attributed them to an administrative oversight. He did not acknowledge the mill. Nora had done more work on the mill by then. She had gone to see it herself, with Clem driving the wagon and Garrett beside her in the seat, not speaking much but present. The mill was operational, not under the Whitfield name, and not paying rent to anyone connected to the estate. A man named Osborne had been running it, and when Nora had introduced herself, he had gone very still in the way of a man who has been waiting for this conversation, and had hoped it would not come. The paperwork connecting Osborne to Harmond and Pierce took Mr. Tarrant 2 more weeks to fully establish. But it was there. When Fitch was presented with it in the study at Ashvale, he lost some of his polish. Nora let him lose it without comment. She had found that silence at the right moment was more effective than anything she could have said. She simply waited until he had finished explaining, and then she outlined, clearly, what restitution was expected and what the alternative was. He agreed to the restitution. She did not smile until he was gone. Then she allowed herself a brief and private satisfaction, looking out the study window at the kitchen garden, which was visibly greener than it had been 6 weeks ago. Summer came slowly to Ashvale that year. The days lengthened. The beds produced. Not abundantly, the soil was still recovering, but enough. Nora hired 2 women from the village, and she asked Mrs. Alderton's opinion on both of them before doing so, which she could see mattered to the older woman in a way that hadn't been offered before. He took to walking the property in the evenings, which she saw from the window. Sometimes Clem was with him. Once she joined him, and they walked to the north fence line in silence. And the silence was not uncomfortable. That was the thing she noticed most. The quality of it had changed. There was an evening in July when the window in the kitchen broke. Not dramatically, just the latch gave out in a gust of wind and the frame cracked. And Garrett appeared with tools, and fixed it himself, working in his shirt sleeves, and she stood in the kitchen doorway watching him, and thought that she had not seen him use his hands before. There was something in the watching that she was not entirely prepared for. She went back to what she was doing. But she thought about it later. She had written to her father twice since arriving at Ashvale. The first letter had been factual, telling him the house was fine, that she was settling in. The second she had written on a night in late June when the restitution from Harmond and Pierce had come through, and she had sat at the writing desk, feeling something she could not name precisely. Not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter. She had written to her father that the property was in better condition than it appeared, and that she was doing well, and she meant both of these things. She did not write about Garrett. There was an evening in August when they were both in the study after supper. She reviewing the updated accounts, he reading, which he had begun doing again. She noticed, after apparently not having read for some time based on the condition of the books on the shelf, and he said without looking up from his book, "The garden is looking considerably better." "It is," she agreed. "The one at the east corner wasn't there before. I added it. The soil there gets more afternoon sun. I thought it would be good for the herbs." He was quiet for a moment, then. "Emmeline wanted a garden there. She never got around to it." Nora looked up. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the page, but she didn't think he was reading it. "Then, it's a good place for one," she said. He didn't respond for a while. Then he turned the page. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it is." She looked back at her accounts. Outside the window the sky had gone the color of plums, the last of the light catching on the herb garden at the east corner, her new rose neat against the old stone wall. She did not press further. There were things that needed time, and she had learned over the course of these months that she was better at waiting than she had known. She had mistaken waiting for passivity once. She understood now that they were different things entirely. The letter came in September. It was addressed to her, not to the household, not to Garrett, but to her, to Mrs. Whitfield, from a Mrs. Elspeth Horton in Dunmore, the wife of one of the farmstead tenants. The woman wrote to say that she had heard, through the village, that there was now proper management at Ashvale, and that she wanted to pass along what had been happening with the farmstead rent for the past 3 years. It was more than Nora had confirmed. She brought the letter to Garrett that evening. He read it at the desk, standing, and she watched his jaw tighten by small degrees as he moved through it. When he finished he set it down carefully. "She's been holding on to this," he said. "Apparently. She didn't know who to tell." He was looking at the letter. "She should have been able to tell me you weren't accessible," Nora said. Not unkindly, simply truthfully. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I wasn't." She left him with the letter and went to bed, and when she came down the next morning he had already written to Mr. Tarrant and to the county office and to Mrs. Horton herself. She saw the letters stacked on the hall table, waiting to be posted. His handwriting was smaller than she would have expected for a man of his presence. She noted that, and did not note it aloud. There was a morning in October when she was hanging the curtains she'd had Mrs. Alderton order for the sitting room. The dust covers were gone by then, the room used again, and Garrett came in without knocking and stood watching her for a moment before she noticed him. "You could have asked me to do that," he said. "I could have," she agreed, "but I was already up the ladder." He stood below her holding the curtain rod she hadn't gotten to yet. It was a domestic thing to do, an ordinary thing, and she thought that some time ago he would not have been able to do an ordinary thing without it meaning something too large. He handed it up to her when she needed it. She hung the curtains. The room looked, when they stepped back, like a room people lived in. "It's better," he said. "It needed the light," she said. He looked at her, and not for the first time. She had noticed him looking in a way that was different from how he had looked at her in the early weeks, the careful, measuring look of a man who had been cautious with himself for a long time. This look was something else, quieter, and more unguarded. She didn't remark on it. Some things needed to be given room to exist before they could be spoken. The first snow came early, the last week of November. The house was warm, not extravagantly. They were still rebuilding, still working back toward what Ashvale had been, but warm in the ways that mattered. The kitchen ran properly. The larder was stocked for winter. The sitting room fire was lit each evening. Mrs. Alderton moved through the house with less of her permanent wariness, which Nora had come to understand was not the woman's natural temperament, but the posture of someone who had been working too hard for too long, with no one to report to, and no certainty the situation would improve. There was a night in December when the snow came down in earnest outside, and they were both in the sitting room, not by design, just by proximity. She had come down with a book. He was already there. And they sat on opposite ends of the sofa, reading for a while in companionable silence. After some time he said, "Without introduction, I owe you an apology." She looked up. "For the beginning," he said, "I should not have left you here alone. Whatever my reasons were, it was a poor way to begin." She considered her answer. There was a version of this moment in which she received the apology graciously and moved on. But she had found that being gracious past the point of honesty was a shortcut she didn't want to take anymore. "It was," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "I was not. I did not know how to be in this house yet. I'm not certain I know how now. But I understand it better than I did." "I know," she said. "I've watched you learning it." He was quiet for a moment. "And yet you stayed." "I said I would make it work," she said. That was not an empty statement. Outside, the snow was coming down past the window, soft and steady. She could see the herb garden from here if she angled right, though it was buried now under white. It would come back in spring. She had already been planning the expansion. A longer row against the south wall, something she had read about in a horticultural pamphlet Clem had brought her from Briarfield. She was aware that Garrett was still looking at her. She turned back from the window. "Nora," he said, the first time he had said her given name. "Yes," she said. "I don't think this has to be what it was at the beginning." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I don't think so either." The fire shifted. The snow kept falling. She picked up her book again and he did not reach for his. "Tell me what you were planning," he said, "for the spring," and she did. She told him about the south wall and the herbs and the east garden, and the additional tenant she had been thinking about for the farmstead, now that they had proper accounting in place, and the mill. There were decisions still to be made about the mill. And he listened to all of it with his full attention, asking questions that were intelligent and sometimes inconvenient. And she found herself answering them with more ease than she had expected. The evening went on. The fire burned low. At some point Mrs. Alderton appeared in the doorway, looked at the two of them, and went back to the kitchen with the expression of a woman revising an opinion she had held for a long time. Nora did not go to bed until late. When she finally did, she sat at the writing desk and looked out at the snow for a long time without writing anything. She had come to Ashvale in October with one bag, and no expectations that anyone would greet her. She had found an empty house and a fraudulent management company, and a kitchen garden that had given up, and a husband who had not yet figured out how to be present in his own life. She was not the same woman who had stepped out of that carriage. She was not sure the house was the same house, and Garrett, the man who had shaken her father's hand without warmth and kissed her cheek and told her the carriage would leave at noon, was, she thought, becoming someone she was genuinely curious about. That seemed like enough to build on. She closed the notebook. She blew out the lamp. Outside, the snow on the herb garden was very white, and in the morning it would catch the first light and she would see it from this window and feel, as she had learned to feel in these months, that the work was not finished but the foundation was sound. That had always been enough for her. It was enough now.